Gosh. Well, thanks so very, very much, Tom, Brett, Andrew, Kendi. I don't think I'm going to be able to live up to making people feel like Lilliputians, but yesterday, where's my new friend? Where's Beck? Beck over there was telling me she was at a presentation a little while ago where a DFAT person came in, insulted everybody, didn't say much and then left. So if at the end of the next 20 minutes you feel a bit left out, come and see me after and we'll see what we can do to square it away. So first of all, this is my, if I can get the thing to work. There we go. That's my authorisation to speak on behalf of DFAT. It's also what I know about train, advise and assist. So bear with me, these are the observations of a rank amateur speaking without any authority whatsoever. It's a very useful slide, I'll come back to it later. So, context first of all, I thought I have been bored nearly to death by any number of combined joint presentations on PowerPoint by at least 4 different sovereign entities that I can think of and 4 services if you include the Marines. Over the last 20 years. So I'll be talking through about these phases in some of the things I say, and just so we're all on the same page, embassies exist in 80, 90 countries around the world out of the 200. Their jurisdiction is universal, which means that between all our embassies and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, we have a 100% coverage of Section 51, subsection 29, i.e. the external affairs power of the Commonwealth. So in Phase 0 and Phase 5, everywhere in the world, DFAT's responsible for whatever's happening. Obviously, we don't have the resources for that. There are 3,700 and the Secretary, all told, globally. So that's half of AFP. Now, there are a number of assumptions that underpin the way staffs work, and I'm basing this on a number of personal experiences. I'll drop anecdotes in, I'll try not to defame any of the wonderful people in the room who've worked with me before. I single out David Hallett, my mentor, friend, and first director in a serious job in DFAT, who's sort of endured me in Papua New Guinea in '97. Going into Bougainville. So the first assumption is Phase 0 and Phase 5 are pretty similar, i.e. ADF has pissed off home. Okay, the mission's either not started or it's over and you've gone. So there's an assumption that the end state and the start state are no ADF presence. There's an assumption that there's an enemy defined at Phase 1. I'll just go back. Phase 1 is you define the crisis. So somewhere back there you say Saddam bad, Ba'ath Party bad, everyone else good, BRA bad, Al-Qaeda bad, Osama bin Laden bad, etc. So you define your enemy. Then you go and you say, well, in Phase 2, when you sort of work out how you create effects, the people in Phase 1 that you defined as the bad guys aren't going to be people you're going to deal with ever again, because they're the bad guys. You can go force over match, smack them, come home, get medals. Phase 3 is that there is such a thing as favourable conditions for transition. Okay? So you make an assumption, this is all the staff dudes before everyone's ever started. This is on, some 3 levels below sea level on some ship or somewhere in Jock, or, there's a bunch of people in a room without windows working through all of this stuff. And they come up with establishing the capabilities you need to make all of this happen. This is a civvy viewing you guys doing this stuff. I mean, most of you got your backs to me when you're doing it, so I'm just watching from outside. So I'm watching you do this, and usually there's a bit of puzzlement on my face, but someone's very kind and usually explains it as you go. Phase 4, which is your establish security, restore services, prepare to leave, there's an assumption it's not generational. And your Phase 5, which is transfer to civil authorities, redeploy, there's an assumption that there are civil authorities that are capable of receiving you. And when you hand it all over to them, it's not going to all turn to custard before you've even got into the Herc. Okay, I had this wonderful vision of leaving TK at the end of, it would have been, Wade's not here, I think it was the 2nd of November or something like that, 2013. And as we were on this, we flew Civi, so as the little, whatever it was, Embraer or something that took us out, took off, I looked back over my window and I could see MK's compound, vehicles leaving to come to where the PRT house area was going to be, well, had been until 2 days before, sort of to take possession of the trade training school and PRT house and the windmill and all of those things. The people who've been there will know what I'm talking about. Fat chance any of that's still working. I don't know, haven't been. So enter DFAT. We're there in phase 0. i.e. we might not be in Uruzgan, but we certainly have an embassy that's responsible for Afghanistan, or an embassy that's responsible for Iraq, or for Bougainville or Papua New Guinea or Solomon Islands, East Timor, any of these places. There is some diplomat somewhere battling malaria or cirrhosis or whatever it is, who's responsible for that piece of the earth. Now, that person might be understaffed, but they've been watching it for 2 to 3 years before phase 0. And there's some hopeless schmuck who's going to have to take it on in phase 5 and be responsible for all the things that you've transitioned over to them. That would be nice if we're included in the middle. We don't have to be. There are examples of us not. But where we have been, we've been able to create some really good effects. So, which takes me through to stabilisation ops. Now, when you talk about you talk about support for how do you describe it? Security force assistance. So, security force assistance is a piece of a problem. If the country is beautifully peaceful and doesn't have a security force, like Solomon Islands, it's got a police force, or Vanuatu had police but no military as well. You don't need stabilisation ops, you don't need these things. But if you do have a situation where you're doing train, advise, assist, chances are there's other stuff wrong as well. I'm going to jump through some of these slides because I know we're very short of time. So in our region, there's a lot of places that have the potential for us to be doing train, advise, assist at some point in the future, or somewhere where in the recent past we have done train, advise, assist. Some of these figures are out, it's worse now. I've thrown in a lot of juicy quotes, so you can read those later when we hand out the book. So this is amusing because Gates says to everybody that he didn't think we'd be repeating Afghanistan or Iraq. So why do we go into these places? Why do we find ourselves having to go back and back and back? Because we have a national interest. So you don't see ADF in Mali, not for long. You might see them coming in on a UN mission to somewhere in Africa or South America or Haiti as a humanitarian exercise, but generally speaking, the national interest is what defines our engagement on train, advise, assist. So terrorism, refugee flows, transnational crime, etc., they're all our interests only insofar as they impact on us. So the first thing to remember is we're not going there to fix their problem, we're going there because of our national interest in their problem. And they might not coincide exactly, which is really awful and unfortunate, because diggers like solving problems. So we went into Afghanistan because 2 days after 9/11, John Howard and the President of the United States had a conversation, and Mr. Howard said, "I'm invoking ANZUS." So the mission at the beginning was find out who was responsible, do something really nasty to them, bring them to justice. That's it, done. That evolved into an operation to displace the Taliban and bring Osama bin Laden to justice. Well, Mullah Omar's gone, Osama bin Laden's gone, Al-Qaeda is degraded. It's not gone, but it's degraded in Afghanistan to a significant extent. And yet, here we are looking at another 5-year plan, post-Resolute support in Afghanistan. Are we still meeting the intent of the planners in 2001? No, because I was there, I remember, and this isn't what we were thinking of. So that doesn't mean we can't be doing it, but we've got to be clear about what our national interests are in that game. And this will play back in later to you guys. So alliance relationships are the reason we went. ANZUS is about US and Australian and New Zealand sovereign interest and security. And then while we were there, we wanted to do all these other good things. And that's where some of this confusion comes from. So I won't go into why we shouldn't go in, because, you know, that's an argument for a whole other day. So why do states fail? States fail because all sorts of bad things happen, or they might just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Difficult for a state to move. But an example of being in the wrong place at the wrong time is Afghanistan now, or Saudi Arabia before the discovery of oil. So their economic success or failure might not be in tune with the times of today. There's $6 to $8 trillion worth of resources under Afghan soil. No one can go digging for it with any great success at the moment. But we don't have to pay for them if they could. So at some point in the future, there's a potential, particularly in rare earths and things, for them to actually become a self-sufficient country. But it's not in our event horizon for our planning. So security, political complexity, economic failure, governance, rule of law failure. Of those, the military solution targets security. Political complexity, economic failure and governance are not your core business. They're all going to contribute to why you're there, but they're not your core business. And it's very rare for security to be able to be fixed without those other 3 bits being fixed as well, which makes it all very hard. Adam isn't here. I'm quoting him from a conversation. I just thought, this is cool, I'm going to write this down. So he may have been quoting somebody else at the time. So if you find me that quote, please let me know and I'll change it from Adam to somebody else. But it was just cool. It encapsulates all the complexities of our problems. They're whole of government problems, because Trained Advisor Assist isn't in a vacuum. It's with AFP, it's with DFAT, and by DFAT now, with machinery of government changes, I include AusAid and the Australian Civilian Corps. It's with Prime Minister and Cabinet. It's with Treasury and Finance, who are directly influencing how you go about your warfight through their decisions to NSC. I won't waste your time with all of that. It just says DFAT needs to be consulted. Take it as read. So, security is one of 3 interlocking spheres. This is cool. This is from the Brits. I pinched this from DFAT. They have this really wonderful thing. Where's Roger? Oh, there he is. So, DFAT, DOD and FCO have combined. They've got a joint budget and a joint team. So the money comes from all 3. And they work together in this cell to effect changes to fragile states. So that's a normally functioning state. Okay, social relationships are working, governance and rule of law is working, economic and infrastructure and development are working. There's a political compact where the security system functions to enable the others. So let's see what happens in a fragile state. Political settlement breaks. Oh. Societal disintegration. We're now looking at Afghanistan. Okay, insecurity takes over. State fragility starts to happen. This breakdown in rule of law affects the economy, infrastructure, etc. If those are weak to begin with, it doesn't take much of a shock for that to then cause economic collapse, which then leads to further insecurity. So we're now in a cycle where countries like Afghanistan find themselves, and you're injecting yourselves in there to do train, advise, assist, focusing primarily on the insecurity piece. You can keep pumping air into that inflatable dinghy for as long as you want, but until you patch the bullet holes, you're going to have to keep pumping that air. So we have to start putting all the pieces together. Okay, this week we've talked about all of these things in the course of the last 2 days, and it's wonderful to hear Army talking about development, and Army talking about the economy, and about policing, and about air, and about Navy, and even about us. Bring it all together might mean that the dudes the ninjas have been trying to kill for the last 10 years have to now be brought into the parliament. So that's always very difficult. The ANA you work with in Afghanistan, the Peshmerga or the Iraqi armies you deal with represent factions in a broken state. They don't necessarily represent all the factions in a broken state. Our experience in East Timor, our experience in Bougainville, elsewhere, teaches us that sometimes today's rebel becomes tomorrow's partner. This is problematic when ANA is largely Tajik and Hazara, and the police is largely local. So DFAT's been in a few of these now. Sadly, it's a small cohort of DFAT. Well, it's small to begin with, so if there's only 3,701, including the secretary, then 3,650 have SFA capability in SFA, and Fred, me, and maybe 10 others would probably encapsulate the DFAT policy piece on engagement over the last 15 years. 66 DFAT officers have deployed to Afghanistan from the beginning to now as force-assigned people. That's development, ACC, and DFAT policy. So if you take out all the policy, take out all the development and ACC people, the DFAT policy cohort's pretty small. 10. And Fred, of course. What's next? Iraq, Syria? We haven't deployed to Taji. Good reason why we haven't deployed to Taji. It's not worth it. I don't know what's next. Libya, perhaps? I don't know. We'll see. So what's our role? In Canberra, we have a role coordinating things like IDETFs. These last 2 days, there's been an IDETF on Afghanistan in relation to a hostage crisis. There is no DFAT geographic policy person sitting in that IDETF because I've been here. That's how small we are. International and regional role. There's usually an embassy. Sometimes it's in the same country. Sometimes it's nearby. There's always an ambassador. There's always an ambassador. Ambassadors are strange. They are executive appointed officials. So EXCO signs off on the ambassador's appointment. They are the Queen's Australian representative in that country. Their authority is guaranteed under the Constitution and international law, and they speak on behalf of Australia, not on behalf of DFAT. DFAT is merely an agency that supports other agencies overseas. We don't have policies of our own. We represent the entire Australian government's policies overseas. So if we say so, that's what your policy is. Thank you. Ambassadors are the embodiment of that in another country. But when we deploy, we have somebody else, usually co-located, force assigned to you guys. Sometimes they're the leader of the mission, sometimes they're in support of the leader of the mission, sometimes they advise the mission. And then there are people like me, the political advisors. Oh, distinction between a pollad and a political advisor. Does anyone know? I love this. Yeah.
One's IPD representative.
Ah, yes. So a pollad is a defence policy advisor from IPDIV. That's a Chihuahua. A political advisor is a diplomatically accredited official who's representing the whole of government. It's not a Chihuahua. Okay, I'll go very quickly through these because we're nearly at time. Now, in all of our missions overseas with you, we've had to do things in order to be part of that mission that make things very difficult for us. First of all, we normally travel unarmed. We normally travel in a permissive environment with diplomatic immunity. When we're part of a SOFA and we're force assigned and we've got body armour and stuff, it undermines our core role, which is actually all about that key leader engagement stuff, that white space stuff that you have to transition into. And if your mission constraints are that we need to leave before you go, then how do you transition to us? So that's a complication. Wade really wanted me to talk about, Wade Stoddart, who's left unfortunately, said to me before he went, he really wanted me to talk about what DFAT brings to a thing like a PRT, a combined joint civ-mil interagency, international, overseas deployment in a non-permissive space with a complex, wicked problem. Fred told you it's all a piece of piss, we can do it all quite easily. It's all about all that white space complexity that you really want to push to one side so you can focus on the bits that your training makes you the masters of. In order for us to do our bit, we need certain freedom of action, which conflicts with your rules of engagement and a whole range of other things you have to deal with. It makes things very hard for you. So we work to embassies. We cut across your chains of command. We cut across your rules about blackouts on communications. We irritate warrant officers. We do all sorts of things on deployment. But that's because we have other responsibilities as well as working with you. Now, rather than go through these on slides, I'll show you some pretty pictures instead. So this is Nick Warner, who now is Director General ACIS, but he was a DFAT officer in charge of a number of missions overseas. We've led on Bougainville as the chief negotiator. In fact, David was chief negotiator. We've had Special Coordinator Ramsey, which I think is where the Nick Warner shots come from. We've had Director PRT working independently but with Commander CTU, who unfortunately had to leave. We've had ADF-led missions where we've provided senior advisors like East Timor. And we bring all those things that Army is struggling to find in their beautifully crafted military construct, the EQ stuff, all that soft stuff, all that stuff that you're not really comfy with. And we got it. We don't have a lot of us, but we've got it. We're useless at the other stuff, you know? It's like trying to hammer a nail with a cucumber. Don't use us for war fighting, but we're really, really good at the negotiation and the persuasion and the influence and the talking and understanding the cultural dynamic. I've been doing Afghanistan stuff since 2012. Before that, I've been doing Middle East stuff since 9/11. I'm hopeless at it. If anyone ever explains to you things about the Middle East and you think you understand, they haven't explained it properly. We write songs in war zones. No, that's a picture of Fred. I had to put at least one gratuitous picture of Fred in there. So we learn to walk far apart and in single file. We host meetings with locals where we're not in body armour and we aren't wearing shoes and we aren't sitting on prayer mats. Stuff like that. We have key leader engagements with locals whom we hope survived the engagement the following night with the ninjas, and then hopefully that leads to some sort of political arrangement that follows, like opening up the road to Chora. And we get senior visitors and get them out of your hair and look after them while they're there. Now, rather than press on, I just want to go to, are we there yet? So, DFAT has no standing capacity to assist Army in a deployment overseas. We'll pull people off desks. We'll pull people coming back from posting. So I was due back from Jordan, where I'd been DHOM for 4 years. I was about to go back to Canberra and think, yay, at last, you know, Delhi section Coles, here I come. And they said, can you get yourself to Afghanistan by March? This is August. Yeah, sure, no problem. So I then spent a year in Kandahar and TK and then Kabul and back home. So with no standing capacity whatsoever. There's no one on a notice to move, in other words, other than me with my passports in my car. Our legislation doesn't allow us to deploy with firearms, and the Australian Workplace Health and Safety Act applies even in a war zone. That makes getting into a Bushmaster for an outside the wire move with a key leader engagement difficult. It makes it near impossible when your force protection teams are Yanks and you're getting into an MRAP. But we do it. It's very, very difficult. And when you see reluctance from DFAT, it's not because of a lack of a will, it's because of the enablers are just not there. So a dialogue with you guys and with Joint Operations Command and with IPDIV to harmonise all of that would make a phenomenal difference for very little cost. So we can do that stuff without becoming deployed soldiers without guns who are really fat and out of breath. We need something that gives us our freedom to do the DFAT role without having the constraints we currently operate under. And is NATO there yet? Not even close. We're probably among the best. So I won't waste too much time with the so what. You've already covered all of that stuff. But that's me done. I should go back to the second slide. So if in doubt, fall back to the DFAT assumption of masterly inactivity.
And you're a diplomat.
Not a good one.
I think with the time and the things we need to do, we might continue on, and look, when we finish, we're not going to throw you out and lock the door. So there will be a chance to talk to Rohan, and I'm really grateful for him coming, speaking of his experience, and I think helping us to understand the constraints in which he operates. So please thank him again for